Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be continuing with our series of talking about and summarizing and analyzing each and every chapter from IB Business Management. Today it is another high level chapter, so standard level. You guys can skip this one, come back next for we'll be moving on to chapter 3. But today it is chapter 2.6, Employer and Employee Relations, high level only. So this chapter is one that has a lot of implications that are important for high-level learners. However, it's also not like very complicated material, and it's not super deep on the level of you can scoot by without it. It's not as much of a foundational point. That said, it is still important information to know, and certainly there will be questions or there will be issues that come up in an exam that are dealing with content from the chapter. So it's still good to know it. Anyway, so to start this chapter, we'll just get right into things. The chapter begins talking about basically the importance of having good employee-employer relationships and says it's just good to have a good relationship between employer and employees so that you can avoid conflicts. I think that's understandable. We can all agree with that one. Then they talk about negotiations and collective bargaining, which are basically ways that you can maintain this good relationship. Because the thing is, and we've talked about this previously, but employees and employers are very certain stakeholders in a business. They're internal stakeholders specifically, which is to say stakeholders working in the business. And as stakeholders, each stakeholder group has their own unique desires, right? So this is in simple terms. Employees want certain things. They want, they want to make good money. They don't want to have, bad working conditions. They want to have benefits. They want this. Then employers want other things. And those things might be, they want to make sure production is as cheap as possible. The company is as productive as possible. They have good corporate image, right? So in some ways, to get to these goals, the goals will be aligned. But there are many cases when they just won't be aligned. It will just simply happen that, for instance, for an employee to get paid a lot of money, that means the company has to pay them, which means for them, they have to spend money on that. And if their goal is to reduce costs, which in many cases it is, those are directly opposing. I mean, this is why when you often hear about disagreements, a major source is the fact that the salaries are either too high or not high enough. And there's a big disagreement on where to find a middle point on what to pay the workers. Anyway, so this is where we get to negotiations and collective bargaining, which is basically businesses saying, all right, we need to work out the system. What are we going to do? So negotiation just means the process of the two sides. This goes for any agreement, not just in business, but for any agreement, for any argument, the two sides coming together and trying to work out a deal. Collective bargaining. You typically hear about this in the context of unions. That's to say there is a union because it's basically saying that you have a negotiation between managers and representatives of the employees. So usually it's a union because it's one person who negotiates for the entire body of workers. This works really well for the workers because it means, number one, they have more power as a group than if it was just one worker negotiating. But also it makes it easier for the employer because they can negotiate with one person and know what all the employees want versus having to negotiate individually with each employee on what they're going to get. Obviously, compromise is necessary for negotiations to work. If you're very stuck in your position, well, then you're not going to get anything done. And there are 3 levels of negotiations that are outlined in this chapter. The first is management negotiations. That's internal, how you're going to run the company. Second are commercial, which is with different organizations. So, if Google and Apple, if they're having a negotiation, that's a commercial negotiation. And then international negotiations, which are negotiations between international companies. So basically commercial negotiations, but between businesses in different countries or between the countries. Because you think about, trade negotiations, for instance, between the United States and Mexico will have implications for all of the companies in each of those two countries or for all the companies that, wish to be involved in the international sphere. And so then this chapter says there are 6 basic stages of a negotiation. These are very simple, straightforward stages. It goes preparation, proposal, debate, bargaining, closing, and review. Not much elaboration on this one. It's just saying those are the ways of first you prepare your debate, then you put forward what you would like to get out of it, what you're looking for. You get ready, you get your ideas together, you brainstorm, you say, all right, this is what we're looking to get out of this negotiation. You come to the negotiation, you present your proposal, you debate it, you come to a final deal, and then you close and you review on it. Now, there are various approaches to negotiations, and this chapter, when it really comes, to when it talks about this topic, a lot of it is talking about methods. There's later on in the chapter, we're going to cover that as well. But at the beginning, it talks about four major types. All right, four major types of negotiations. The first one is avoidance, which is not negotiating whatsoever. It is saying, all right, we have a problem. No, we don't. No, we don't have a problem. What's that? Problems? What are they? Nah, get out of here. Acting like they don't exist. The second is level playing ground. This is saying we're going to negotiate and both sides have to be willing to negotiate. The problem is if only one person has a problem, like say the employees have a problem, but the employer doesn't have a problem, does not work. But level playing ground is saying both sides are willing to come together. Maybe the employees have an issue and the employees say, all right, we're willing to work with you guys on this. This is very productive for business, obviously, because it means you can resolve a conflict rather than just having to live with it. Then there's winner takes all, which is negotiating style where basically there's a winner and there's a loser. It's very zero sum. This is especially common in lawsuits. If a negotiation has to go to the point of a lawsuit, then at the end of that lawsuit, there's going to be a case and there's going to be a winner and there's going to be a loser. And so that's a very important part of how that all gets sorted out. And then there's win-win, which is the final one. And that's basically both. You're trying to work so that both sides can win. Ideally, that's what all negotiations should be like, is you're trying to get everyone to get what they want out of it, a deal that everyone benefits from. But it's rare that can be the case, especially when you have both sides that have quite opposing views on what they want to get out of it. Okay, and then they talk about the methods that you can use to achieve your goals. First, by employees. This is to go slow or slow down. This is basically employees taking the contract as literally as humanly possible. So if the contract says you have to produce this many units, you produce this many units. If you have to work at this many hours, you only work that many hours, not a minute more, not a minute less. Or generally speaking, another way to say it is they're working the minimum that their contract requires them to. So they are working, but they're not actually working, because the thing is a contract, often it puts out minimum requirements. But the idea is the employee is going to work beyond those requirements just because it's practically what their job requires. For them to, feel like to complete tasks, they have to work more than the maximum. Or if they're trying to get certain financial rewards, they're going to work more than that minimum. When you do a go slow or slow down, you're basically saying, I'm going to work as little as I need to be done for it to count as I've done my job. So if if your job is to work 8 hours at McDonald's, 8 hours on the dot. The second it's 4 o'clock, I get in at 8 o'clock and I will leave at 4 o'clock and I will leave. If the store's not clean, doesn't matter. I'm leaving because you know what? I did my 8 hours. It's that kind of thing. So that can cause a lot of inconvenience for business and lots of problems because it means employees are only doing exactly what they're required to do. They're not going beyond. You often need that. Also an overtime ban. So this kind of goes hand in hand with the hour example I was just giving. If you have to work until 8 o'clock, work until 4 o'clock, but in some cases they need an extra worker to work up until, from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. to cover some extra people coming in. Well, now you're the union saying, no one's working overtime. You only work exactly the hours you have to work. Even if normally with overtime you get paid more, they're saying, nope, not going to happen. The final one is strike action, which, by the way, is illegal if you don't priorly notify the business. But this is typically done by unions. You'll often hear about this from a teachers union, for instance, is if there's a problem and they've gotten to the point in negotiation where they just don't feel like they're going to get the conclusion they want out of it as things are currently going, they just stop working. That's a strike. They just say, I'm just going to stop working until we get what we want. It's a very zero-sum way to do it, and it's not a great system because it means you don't get paid in most cases, or you get paid very little. So it's not great for the workers, but it is a way to get your goals very quickly, if that's what you're looking for. Then we have methods by employers to achieve objectives. The first is public relations, which means work in the media, basically doing everything they can so that the government or so that the business looks as good and sympathetic as possible so that they have the public support on their side. Because if they do, then all the employees are going to seem like the bad guys for being against them. and public support will be for the business. Meanwhile, if the public also supports the employees, that makes it really hard for the employer, the business, to get what they want, because then if they're not giving the employees what they want, their customers are going to stop coming. They're going to suffer, and the profits in the media sector and their corporate image overall is going to look worse. Another thing they can do is lock out their employees, which is like the corporate version of a strike. It's the same thing. It's the employees stop working, except it's imposed by the company. Instead of a strike is the employees decide to stop working. A lockout is the company says you are not going to work, and so we're not going to pay you while you're not working. There's also the threat of redundancy. Redundancy we've discussed in a previous chapter, but briefly speaking, redundancy is when the business gets restructured. So the structure of the business changes around, and if you're in a certain position, all of a sudden that just stops existing. As in, basically, restructuring means it's not firing, because they're not saying, hey, we don't need you. You're changing the business so that their position just ceases to exist. Like if, for instance, you had someone in like a managerial role, and then all of a sudden you change the structure of management so that their job just doesn't exist anymore. And you're like, well, we have to fire you because we don't have a job. That's what redundancy is. It's making the job redundant, changing the structure so that you don't need their job, and therefore you have to get rid of that person because their job is not needed. So the threat of redundancy can be very powerful, because it means, we could just get rid of you. And unlike a typical firing, we don't have to give you severance pay, which, typically if you fire someone, you have to pay them a certain amount as you're firing them. We don't have to deal with any of the contract messiness. We don't have to legally justify it. We just say, oh, we've restructured the business, and well, you're just gone because your job stopped existing. Whoops. You can also change the contracts, change the compensation, change the benefits, until you get what you want. Also, you can have closure, which is similar. It's closing the business, closing out their positions, basically, and those fun things. All right. So then we get into conflict itself. What causes conflict? To start, you have difference in needs and wants, perceptions, and incompatible values. That's just basic, workers and employees just have differences in what they're looking for, differences in how they see a certain situation. Because it's very often that a certain dispute at first begins as just a slight inconvenience in the workplace. It's just something that, oh, this is happening. And then all of a sudden it's, well, we're striking, because it's like the dispute hasn't changed. It's just gotten worse. And the way each side is seeing the dispute, maybe for the employer, it's not a big deal, but for the employees, it is, or vice versa. And then, so the approach that you're going to use to negotiation is quite different based on what kind of concern you have regarding that certain debate, or regarding that negotiation. And this actually, I made a fun little chart in my notes. So I could actually recommend, as I'm listing these off, you guys can make a chart with them, because I think that'd be quite helpful. All right. So there's two categories here on this chart. All right. There's concern for yourself and concern for others, concern for your fellow employees and for the other stakeholders in the business. All right. And so each of those, depending on what their conditions, what your approach is going to be. Now, if your concern for yourself is very high, you're going to use a win-lose approach, because you're saying, I'm the important one. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to win. And for the rest of y'all can take it. It's about me winning. Now, if your concern for others is high, your approach is going to be a surrender approach. That's to say, whatever you want. Again, in these cases, it's basically saying you only care about one thing. So either you only care about yourself, or you only care about the others, and your care for yourself is non-existent. In each of those cases, you're going to take a very zero sum. Either win, I need to win and you need to lose, or surrender. You can have whatever you want. Then if your concern for yourself and others is low, then you're going to use an avoidance strategy, which is to say, what doesn't exist. You're gonna act like the problem doesn't exist. If your concern for yourself and your concern for others is high, you're going to try to use collaboration. That's to say, you're going to try to work with them and try to find a solution collectively together. And if your concern for others and concern for yourself is moderate, you're going to try to compromise. That's to say, these are a bit different, because compromise is I mean, people often say compromise is the solution that makes both sides unhappy. Like if both sides leave the negotiating room mad, that means it's a fair compromise. So that's why compromise, you see it as moderate concern. If you're very high concern, you're going to try to be proactive and find a solution collaboratively. Versus a compromise is more, I have my hard rock, you have your hard rock. We're just going to and make it a softer rock together. So that's kind of where the difference comes in. Is it's just the difference of intensity, right? If you have very, very high care, well, then you're going to be a bit more proactive and a bit more productive than if you have kind of moderate concern, in which case you're not going to be as proactive and you're going to let it get to the point of it's hard rock versus hard rock. And we got to figure out a deal this way through negotiation rather than collaboration. All right. And then we get to conflict resolution. There are a bunch of different methods you can use, which are all, this is just a very list type thing. So I'm just going to grab the notebook and we're just going to read them off. All right. First one, conciliation. I don't know why I said it so weird. That's to say you get an independent arbitrator who comes in and basically they help you compromise the deal. They work with both sides. They often do a thing that's called caucusing, which is basically they meet individually with each side. So they meet with the employers, they meet with the employee, and they work as an intermediator, trying to find a deal that works between both sides. And the idea is that this arbitrator is neutral. They don't put themselves in a debate. They simply try to find what's the best deal. Second is arbitration. This is the same principle, which is you have an independent arbitrator, but what they do is they simply come in and they decide the case. They're basically acting like a judge and they make a decision. So this is a bit more of a win-lose type thing than conciliation, or conciliation is you're trying to work between the two sides and compromise instead of win-lose. Industrial democracy or employee participation, which uses the motivation theories that we've discussed in previous chapters. And basically says the employees are going to be involved in decision-making and it's going to be a type of vote is the idea. No strike agreements, the agreement that employees aren't going to strike. Single union agreements. This can be frustrating for employers. If you have a ton of different little unions within a company, that can be very annoying because then you have to negotiate with all of them. It'd be, imagine if, think right now in the MLB, there's one players union. All right, there's 30 teams and there's one union that represents all the players. Could you imagine how annoying it would be if for each team, the players had their own union that negotiated with the MLB? Because what just happened was actually there was a whole drama it was 2 years ago, I believe, because they had to renegotiate the contract for MLB. And it worked out. I mean, people thought it was actually going to take longer than it did, but it worked out in part because there was one players union. So all the players were represented by one group and they're able to share their common interest, see what those common points were with the MLB and come to a deal. But if the Red Sox and the Yankees and the White Sox and the Marlins and whoever each had their own independent players unions, that would have been impossible because MLB would have had to negotiate with 30 different players unions, come to its agreements with each union, and each of those agreements would have had to be compatible with each other because you couldn't say, one of the biggest deals they had to come to was and this is getting now very technical, but they had to decide if they're going to implement designated hitters or not, which is simply speaking a very major change to baseball. And in the case of, the Red Sox, say maybe they were in favor of it, but the Marlins weren't. Well, then what do? Fortunately, because all of them are represented by one union, that meant that one union negotiated on behalf of all of them. And there was one deal that had come to, and that was it. All right. So that was a long explanation to say. Single union agreements means you're saying there's only one union we got to agree with, not a bunch of different ones. You're agreeing that there's only going to be one, and I'm going to negotiate with that one. Then there's consultation, is to consult with your employees. Litigation, which are lawsuits. And as I said before, lawsuits and litigation lend themselves to very win-lose outcomes because someone's going to win the legal case and someone loses the legal case. If you get to that point, like arbitration and other kinds of more neutral agreements are out the window. Realistic expectations. This is just to say everyone set your bar in the right place. Don't hope you're trying to get everything. No, accept the fact that this is a negotiation, not, a game that you're here to win, and make a deal. And then avoidance, which is likely to cause a lose-lose situation for the problems you mentioned before. Because if you're in the avoidance category, probably it's because you don't care, or you don't want to address the problem, which means the problem will get worse. And that will lead to bad outcomes for everybody because you won't address the problem. All right. Then there's changes in management. That can obviously create conflicts or it can resolve conflicts depending on how you see it. In some cases, a change of management is the only way to resolve a conflict. Going back to baseball teams, there are many cases when the owner or manager of a baseball team is just seen as like they've done everything they can with him, and the players are just like, we can't work with this manager, get a new one. And so the owner fires him and he says, all right, let's get a new one in here. Or, same in all kinds of businesses that you just say, we need a change in management. Like either we change the employees or we change the management. These groups simply cannot work together. This can be influenced in part by exogenous factors. This is a special business management term. Exogenous factors are just external factors, things like change in fashion, state of the economy, basically changes in the external environment that are going to impact the business, especially on the economic side. Then and this brings us into a theory of John Kotter, who is brought up actually a couple of times in this chapter. John Kotter, who discusses the four main reasons why people are resistant to change. The first is self-interest over corporate objectives. Basically, you prioritize yourself more than the best needs or best interests of the company. Second is misunderstandings, uncertainties, and also the mentality of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Basically, people being unwilling to make changes because they say, well, it works fine, and they settle for mediocrity. Also, different assessments of a situation. This is what we said when I was talking previously about different interpretations, different understandings. There's many cases when the employer will see something is not serious and the employees do, or vice versa. And that can mean there's resistance to change by the ones who don't think it's a problem because they say, well, what's the matter? Or, of course, if there's people who agree it's a problem but don't know how to fix it, different visions, different assessments of that situation, well, then you're going to have very different results. Also, low tolerance for change. That was pretty straightforward. If you don't like changing, well, you're going to be resistant to it. And ambivalence, which is basically the state of having two opposing opinions at the same time within one person. Me being like, I understand this side of the debate and this one, and I don't know which to go with. Or just straight up not knowing what you think about an issue. But basically, ambivalence by any side, any group, or any even individual can really halt the progress of change, because if you're not convinced of a change being the correct decision, then you're not going to be in favor of it. All right. Then there's reducing the impacts of change. Again, we're back with our buddy Kotter that I just mentioned. And there are 6 that are approaches to change that Kotter mentions that you can use to reduce its impact. Education and communication, participation and involvement. This also uses the Mayo and Herzberg theories of motivation, which, if you guys will remember, we're going to take a quick pop quiz lesson on those. All right, Herzberg's, right, is talking about hygiene and motivation, basically saying that there are 2 factors. Hygiene is that there's physical needs that you have to fulfill, and motivation is that there's psychological, which means you have to be enriched and satisfied in a job. And then as for Mayo, sorry, I have to check through my notes real quick. Okay, sorry. This is the first time I think I've ever had this happen to me. I just completely blanked on Mayo's theory. Mayo's theory is basically saying that employees are motivated far more by relational factors such as attention and camaraderie than by monetary rewards or environmental factors, which almost goes in the reverse of Herzberg's theory, because Herzberg is saying the business has to provide you certain things like physical needs, monetary needs. You have to be filled by your job. Mayo is saying, all right, you have to be satisfied by the camaraderie and the people. I would say personally, the Mayo theory is actually the one I buy the most into. Um, but that's a personal belief. Anyway, so participation and involvement, which you have to use Mayo and Herzberg's theories of motivation because those kind of apply to these needs of the case of, satisfying first the motivation part of, the psychological, are you satisfied part of Herzberg's theory, and then also the Mayo part of, do you feel that sense of camaraderie? So having good participation and involvement, you are able to give proper motivation to your employees through fulfillment, through camaraderie, makes the transition easier. Then facilitation and support, negotiation and agreement, manipulation and co-option. This is not a great one, but it is a possible approach. Because again, remember, these are all different approaches for how you can implement a change and reduce its impact. Manipulation, lie, and basically try to make it so that people don't think the change is as serious as it will be. And explicit and implicit coercion. That's another way of saying manipulation. Basically, to alter people's interpretation of what's happening. Don't give the whole truth to them about the changes and in some cases, this isn't exactly a bad thing because there's some changes that would be extremely alarming if you said from the beginning what the change was. But if you say it in the right way and you kind of ease people into it, it's a lot easier than if you just said the truth from the outset. All right. Then we also get John Story, who discusses 4 different ways you can manage change. And so these go a bit hand in hand with John Cotter's methods, but they are separate, a bit more complex. All right, so there are 4 methods that he mentions for approaching change. The first is imposed package, which is you just shove the changes right on the employees. The second is an imposed piecemeal initiative, which is basically you're coming in and you're saying, all right, here's this plan that we have, and we're gonna do it in pieces. We're gonna apply it phased in. And so these are both imposed. All right. So these are not negotiated. They're just saying, here's the change we're making, here it is. But you're doing it in different ways. In one phase, you're just doing it all at once. You're just like, all right, here's the change we're making, here it is. And the other way is saying, here's the change we have, all right, here it is in phases. The other one is negotiated. You have negotiated total packages, which is you negotiate something with the employees, and then one day, all right, here's the change. Or negotiated piecemeal packages, which are you negotiate it, and then you implement it in phases. Each of these has their own benefits and disadvantages, and have to be applied situationally for what is the best context to apply certain change in. Then we get to the iceberg model. And this talks about when you're changing something, who you have to deal with, what factors you have to consider. All right. And so they say there's basically 2 levels, as there are, the part above the iceberg and the part underwater, more or less. All right. The top level, the above water part, is the cost, the quality, and the time. These are, the more kind of objective, like physical parts of a change. And then you have the bottom level, which are the people and the stakeholders. And within that bottom level, you have many layers. It's almost like, you imagine you see an iceberg as a little tiny thing at the top, but it's really this whole underneath it. That's kind of how this comes into play. Because you get to the bottom level. And on the bottom level, you have 4 groups. First are opponents. Second are promoters. These ones are pretty straightforward. People who are in favor of your change, your plan you're putting into place. People who are against it. Or I guess flips. Opponents are against it. Promoters are for it. Then you have hidden opponents, which are people who seem for it. Their behavior says they're for it, but actually they're against it. And potential promoters, which are people who seem against it, but could be for it. These all just kind of, each stakeholder group is going to have people like this that are in different phases. It really depends on which group they're part of, the opinion their group supports, the opinion they support, the status of them in the business, a whole bunch of factors. And finally, back to our old buddy Cotter. He's talking about the change phases model again, but this time, 8 reasons why change management fails. This is the final point of the chapter. The 8 reasons are too much complexity in the change, no support from staff, no clear vision, no communication with the stakeholders, obstructions of the vision, does not focus on small continuous change, so too abrupt, declares success too soon, so does not finish the change before being like, well, we've succeeded, we've made this change, and ignoring the corporate culture, trying to implement a change that goes against corporate culture. And if you want to see more about corporate culture, you can watch my last video that I talk all about it. And with that, we did it, guys. We got to the end of chapter 2 of IB Business Management. We're done with all the high-level content for this chapter. So congratulations, guys. You've got here. We made it. And sorry for such a long video, and I got a bit lost in the middle there. But it really is, it's just a lot of content to memorize, a lot of content to keep up here in the coconut. So we're going to do the best we can. With that, if you guys need any more information on the first 2 chapters, including everything high level related, check the link down below. I have all the information put up in there. I'm going to be continuing in the coming days with chapter 3, 4, and 5. So stay on the lookout for that. And I do have an announcement to make, which is, so this channel is not going to be limited anymore to just business management. Shortly, I will be starting summaries of other chapters in IB or other subjects because, as I've stated before, this is not just an aid for you guys. It's also my way of studying. I work really well when I can explain content to other people, not just see it. So what I will be doing is doing my other subjects. The one I most have to study is environmental sciences and societies. So I'm going to start releasing videos summarizing that. They'll be coming very shortly. In fact, I believe actually I'll have a video coming out today if everything goes to plan. Quick caveat is the school I go to is bilingual. That subject I don't do in English. I do it in Spanish. It is called there Sistemas Ambientales y Sociedades. I speak Spanish. I will be giving all the summaries in Spanish because I'm studying the subject in Spanish. So as a result, if you do not speak Spanish, I apologize. You should be able to use YouTube-based subtitles for the most part to follow, or if you also speak Spanish, well, then it will be a fantastic resource for you. But I'll be doing those summaries in Spanish. So if you guys do need those resources and you speak Spanish or have a way to get subtitles on the video, go for it. I'll do my best, but the problem is with the studying load and how long these videos are, it just won't be possible for me to personally subtitle the videos in Spanish. Otherwise, I 100% would. But regardless, so those will be coming out very soon. If you guys need those resources, absolutely, you can go to those videos and I'll do what I can to aid you guys. And with that said, thank you for watching. Do stick around for more videos coming on Sistemas Ambientales y Sociedades and also business management, of course, coming soon. And with that, thank you for watching. Any questions in the comments down below, and have a fantastic rest of your day.